So in Isaiah chapter 9, we read about this promise to the people of Judah that whatever they're going through isn't going to last forever, because God is promising you He is going to send a future king, and He's going to describe what this king will look like here in just a second here. But He's talking to the people who are faithful, and this is what He tells them. Isaiah 9, in the first verse. He says, "Nevertheless, that time of darkness and despair will not go on forever. The land of Zebulun and Naphtali will be humbled, but there will be a time in the future when Galilee of the Gentiles, which lies along the road that runs between the Jordan and the sea, will be filled with glory. The people who walk in darkness will see a great light." Now, I read that because this has a special significance in the New Testament. If you read in Matthew 4, when Jesus does come on the scene 700 some years later, verse 12, Matthew 4:12 says this. Right after John the Baptist had been arrested, he left Judea and returned to Galilee. He went first to Nazareth, then left there and moved to Capernaum, beside the Sea of Galilee, in the region of Zebulun and Naphtali. This fulfilled what God said through the prophet Isaiah. In the land of Zebulun and Naphtali, beside the sea, beyond the Jordan River in Galilee, where so many Gentiles live, the people who sat in darkness will have seen a great light. So it's referred to in Matthew when Jesus came that He is the fulfillment of what Isaiah was saying. So when Jesus moved to Capernaum, which is right next to the Sea of Galilee, I know because I've been there, it fulfilled that Isaiah said that, listen, in the future, there's going to be a ruler who is going to be like a great light. When you're in darkness, there's going to be somebody who's going to be like a great light, and He's going to move to this particular region. And of course, that was fulfilled by Jesus. If you go back to Isaiah chapter 9, a couple verses later in verse 6, Isaiah describes what the government will be like that Jesus, the Messiah, is going to institute. He says, "For a child is born to us." Now, if any of you have been around churches at Christmas time, you've heard this verse. "A child is born to us, a son is given to us. The government will rest on His shoulders, and He will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. His government and its peace will never end. He will rule with fairness and justice from the throne of His ancestor David for all eternity." Now that's from Isaiah 740 years before Jesus ever came. Have you guys heard this verse referenced in Christmas stories and stuff, right? So imagine Isaiah is telling this to the faithful people of Judah, okay, who was living in a time where it's chaos, complete chaos and destruction. Northern kingdom of Israel is about to be annihilated. Everybody's fallen from God, turning away from God. And so He's given them comfort that the Messiah is going to come, and this is what His government's going to look like. And He describes it like this. He says that, for one, it's going to be a child who was born. So it's not going to be that God is just going to come from heaven and appear on the earth. It's actually going to be through a birth, which is important. We know that He's going to be a son. And we know that He's going to be equal with God the Father, because He's referred to as Mighty God and Everlasting Father. And He's going to have a government of peace, which is very different because most kingdoms in this time, they look to, push their might around through their military power, not through a government of peace. So this is a very different type of government. It says that this government that's coming will be established forever. And it will never end. It's eternal. It's everlasting. And the fact that Jesus was the fulfillment of this is possible because does Jesus die? Is He going to live and reign forever? Right? So His kingdom never dies. So He is the eternal fulfillment of the throne of David. And so Isaiah is sharing this with the godly men and women of Judah to give them hope. For the citizens of Judah who did believe in God, which they were run out of them, this motivated them to endure whatever was going to happen in the next several years. They knew one day that God would restore their kingdom, even if it wasn't in their lifetime. And as it is, it happened 700 years after that. So when we see the life of Isaiah, when we read through the book, he had to balance two things. For one, he was always rebuking people who were wicked, and always telling them what God's judgment was going to look like. And that's a horrible life to have to live, and you're always just giving somebody bad news. But the people, they wouldn't listen, right? So he was always doing it. But he also got to give the promise of future hope to people who were living in a godly way. So he at least got those glimpses where he got to give some good news every once in a while. So while Isaiah was giving the promise of this future Messiah in this government that's going to be awesome, the nation of Assyria was rising to a greater power, and it was becoming the world's superpower. As you probably heard me say many times, in the year 722, as you saw in that graph, Assyria finally conquers the nation of Israel, the northern nation of Israel. Remember, it got divided. So the northern part of it was conquered and destroyed by the Assyrian Empire. It didn't take long. Israel didn't really put up a whole lot of a fight. They realized that they put their hope and faith in trying to negotiate, trying to pray to false gods and make alliances with wicked nations, and it didn't work. It didn't save them. Only God could have saved them, but they pushed God out of their life, and so Assyria came and they conquered the northern nation of Israel. God sent them warnings. He sent several prophets, as you saw from the graph. He practically begged them to turn back to God. But in the year 722 BC, God used Assyria, a wicked, foul nation, to overtake the northern kingdom of Israel. And think about the kingdom the entire kingdom that David once ruled. King David once ruled. David who killed that Philistine giant Goliath when he was younger, when he grew up, and he became the king over the entire nation of Israel. The northern half of that whole thing now belonged to Assyrians, the enemy of Israel. So that happened in 722 BC. Now, Assyria was like a snowball effect. When it was rolling down the mountain, it was getting bigger and bigger. And so it starts mowing over these nations, conquering people. They have a thirst for power. And so they start to get really arrogant and think that they're don't stink. And so they were growing. And so several years after they destroyed Israel, they decided, we're going to go and we're going to destroy Judah too, and we're just going to go ahead and take that land while we're at it. Okay? So what they did is they planned on working their way south. Let's throw that map up if we can. Next picture. There we go. Okay, so this whole nation was Israel at one time where King David ruled. This northern part, Israel, now belonged to the Assyrians. Okay? And the Assyrian Empire decided, hey, let's just go ahead and take Judah while we're at it. But God had different plans. He wasn't ready for Judah to fall into the hands of Samaria. He wasn't ready for Jerusalem, the capital of Judah, to fall into the hands of the Assyrians. He wanted to give them time to repent. Because Judah, as wicked as they were becoming, and as far as they were pushing God out of life, they weren't quite as bad as Israel to the north. So God makes two predictions here. He predicts that Assyria will be brutally attacked, but they won't be destroyed. I'm sorry, that Assyria will attack Judah, but he's not going to allow them to destroy it. And then the next thing that God says, as you read through the book of Isaiah, is that after Assyria is done doing what God wants them to do, God is going to destroy Assyria. Think about that. The world superpower, unlike anything that has lived up to that point, God says he is going to destroy Assyria after he uses Assyria to punish Judah. He just wants to get Judah's attention. And you think, well, that's harsh, man. Why would God do that? Listen, if God doesn't bring punishment, people will never, ever want anything to do with them. Punishment, trials, tribulation, turmoil brings us back to realization. Would you guys agree with that? I'm so grateful that God has punished me in ways that's got my attention, that's woke me up. So I was like, you know what, I got to remember who my master is. I got to remember who the King of Kings is. That's what tribulation is. It's not that God's up there, prideful and arrogant, just says, I want you to do this because I said so. He loves us enough that he will do whatever it takes to bring us back. And so he is allowing Assyria to attack the nation of Judah. And so here's what happens. In the year 701, about 21 years after Israel is destroyed, Assyria decides they're going to come and they're going to destroy Judah and they're going to take that land. All right? 701 BC. Now follow this with me. I know it's history, but just follow this for a second. Assyria moves into Judah, and every major city in Judah that has fortified walls, and any city that's a threat that has most cities had walls built by Trump, and they were strong, and it defended from battles and stuff. And so they came and they overtook every single city in Judah. In the nation of Judah was now Assyrian stronghold. Assyrians now overtook it. There was one city left in the nation of Judah that Assyria didn't control in 701 BC. Okay? This is as you read throughout the book of Isaiah. And now when you go back and read on your own, it's going to make a lot more sense. So they came and they just overtook every other city in this nation of Judah except for Jerusalem. The majority of the populations in those cities were either killed or they were taken captive. So Assyria then surrounds Jerusalem with over 200,000 soldiers, and they decide, we're gonna take Jerusalem and we're gonna finish off Judah for good. The last city that they have to take in order to completely conquer this nation is Jerusalem. So they surround the walls of Jerusalem. If they can overtake Jerusalem, then there's going to be no more kingdom of Judah left. And this is how close the nation of Judah came to being destroyed in the year 701 BC. There was about 2,000 soldiers left inside the city for Judah, and 200,000 surrounding them on the outside of the walls. That was the only part of Judah's army left. All the other soldiers were taken captive or killed as Assyria was pushing through this nation. But during this threat, they had the blessing of having the prophet Isaiah inside Jerusalem. And they also had one of the very few godly kings ruling Judah at this time, who was a man named Hezekiah. Hezekiah feared God. He was one of the few kings who did. And so between Hezekiah and Isaiah, they trusted God for the first time. Hezekiah feared God, and he knew what God was capable of doing. Hezekiah saw what happened in the northern kingdom, saw what happens when you put your faith in other governments or put your faith in other false gods or whatever. That didn't really work out too well for Israel. So they decided, we're going to try to do it God's way. Man, how many times do we have to do it the wrong way before we decide that sometimes, right? But Judah has no ability to defend itself. Here's all that's left with Judah is right here inside the city walls. About 2,000 soldiers, and then of course men, women, and children inside there, and hundreds of thousands of people, massive weapons, a nation that is the strongest nation in the world, completely outnumbered. All the other options that they tried in the past never worked. They tried forming alliances. They were hoping maybe Egypt or some big brother would come and save them. It never worked. God said, try me. And they're like, you know what? We have no other options. We're going to have to trust in God. Have you been here, church? Have you been there before where you're like, man, I tried it my way for years. I did this, and it never works out. And God's sitting there like with his hands on the hips, like, when are you going to try it my way?